Millionaire faces street boy in a restaurant. When the boy says, "Sir, my mom has a ring just like yours," the man faints. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The sky over Chicago was still a pale gray when Liam Parker awoke. The cold concrete beneath the overhang of a closed storefront served as his alarm, seeping through the thin, warm blanket and chilling him to the bone. At just 9 years old, Liam knew this city better than most. He knew where to duck out of the rain, which diners might hand him a scrap of bread without shooing him away, and how to slip unnoticed through alleys when certain looks grew too dangerous. Beside him, a faded backpack held all he owned: an old photograph of his mother, a tattered notebook filled with drawings and thoughts, and a soft cloth handkerchief with the initials HP stitched carefully in the corner. It was all he had left of his past. It was also what kept him moving each day. His mother, Hannah Parker, had vanished months ago. Since then, Liam had done what he could to survive, driven by one unwavering truth: he would find her, even if it meant searching every street, every corner, every face in this sprawling city. Across town, in a sleek penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Ethan Cole was having his morning coffee. CEO of one of the top tech companies in the country, he was known as much for his brilliant mind as for his emotional detachment. The penthouse mirrored his life, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline, clean modern furnishings, not a single splash of warmth or color. Everything was calculated, controlled. Everything except for one small object that didn't quite belong: a wooden box resting on the glass coffee table. Inside it lay a silver ring, the last remnant of a love Ethan had never been able to erase. Hannah Parker, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in nearly a decade. She had disappeared without a trace, taking with her a piece of his soul he'd never reclaimed. That evening, unable to bear another night alone in the sterile apartment, Ethan chose to dine out. He booked a table at the Meridian, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants. Reservations were made weeks in advance, and the clientele included corporate elites, celebrities, and political figures. Seated at a corner table, Ethan ordered his usual dish and lost himself in thought, idly swirling the deep red wine in his glass. Outside on the bustling street, Liam wandered past glowing storefronts, his stomach empty, eyes alert. The scent of food drifted from the revolving doors of the restaurant, making his belly ache. A sign by the entrance read, "For patrons only." Liam knew he wasn't supposed to go in. But when he glimpsed through the window and saw a solitary man wearing a silver ring identical to the one his mother used to wear, an instinct stronger than hunger pushed him forward. Chin lifted, gathering his courage, Liam pushed open the door. Instantly, all eyes turned to him, a thin boy in ragged clothes, determined gaze cutting through the refined atmosphere. Whispers rippled among the diners. The servers hesitated, unsure what to do. But Liam didn't falter. He walked straight toward Ethan's table and stopped in front of him. The hush that had fallen over the room was broken only by the boy's clear, unwavering voice. "Sir, my mom has a ring just like yours." Ethan looked up, startled. The words hit him with full force. The child's face, those deep brown eyes, there was something achingly familiar in them. Something that stirred long-buried memories. His hand shook around the stem of the wine glass, the silver ring gleaming beneath the chandelier. The shock was too much. Ethan collapsed, unconscious, amid a flurry of gasps and chaos in the dining room. While the restaurant staff and patrons scrambled around him, Liam remained rooted to the spot, watching the man who had fainted at his words. He didn't fully grasp what had caused such a reaction, but one thing was clear in his heart: this night was going to change everything. He didn't know how or why, but it would. Moments later, a physician who had been dining nearby rushed over and performed a quick assessment in the restaurant's small private office. Ethan regained consciousness shortly after, the sharp scent of alcohol stinging his senses, a concerned employee leaning over him. "You fainted, sir," the doctor explained gently. But Ethan's first question came urgently. "Where's the boy? Where is he?" That was when he learned the child had slipped away amid the commotion. And for the first time in years, the name Hannah Parker echoed through Ethan's mind, louder than ever. On the drive back to his penthouse, Ethan sat in silence, eyes fixed on the city lights flickering past the car window. The scene at the restaurant kept looping in his mind. The boy's voice, the words he'd spoken, that silver ring. It was impossible to believe it was all a coincidence. Once home, he tossed his coat onto the sofa, switched on a small lamp, and walked over to a bookshelf where an old wooden box sat, untouched for years. Inside were fragments of a life he rarely allowed himself to revisit: notes, faded photographs, and a letter Hannah had written long ago but never sent. He'd found it months after she vanished, tucked inside a stack of her belongings he couldn't bear to part with. With careful fingers, he unfolded the envelope and read the words once again, though they struck him differently now. "If you ever see this ring on another's hand, know that not everything lost is gone." The meaning of those words was undeniable. Now, the boy's face, that familiar gaze, the message he delivered so simply, everything was beginning to align in Ethan's mind in a way he couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, across the city, in an alley not far from Millennium Park, Liam huddled beneath the rusted frame of an old shopping cart. The threadbare blanket barely shielded his thin body from the biting wind that swept through the narrow street. His head rested on his worn backpack, gaze locked on the photo of his mother, Hannah's youthful smile captured forever as she leaned into a tall man in a sharp suit. His face slightly faded, but now startlingly clear to Liam. It was the man from the restaurant. His pulse quickened. His mother's words echoed in his memory. "If something happens and I don't come back, find the man with the ring. He'll know who you are." Though he didn't fully understand it, tonight's encounter had confirmed one thing: he was closer than ever to finding her. Clutching the handkerchief with the delicate initials HP pressed to his chest, he drifted to sleep with a deep certainty that everything had changed. Among the patrons dining at the Meridian that night, one woman had observed the commotion with keen professional interest. Rachel Bennett, an investigative journalist with over 15 years of hard-hitting experience, had seen plenty in her career. But something about that moment stirred her instincts in a way few stories ever had. She'd been at the restaurant, by chance, meeting a source for a corruption piece, when the boy's bold entrance caught her eye. Almost without thinking, she'd filmed the scene on her phone, jotting down the exact words Liam had spoken. Back at her loft, crammed with stacks of research, books, and unfinished articles, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling. She watched the clip repeatedly, then ran a quick search on Ethan Cole. A private man. No scandals. No known children. Number. Tabloid history. Yet the way he'd looked at that boy, something undeniable had been triggered. There was a story here. A big one. The next morning, Rachel set out across downtown Chicago with a printout of Liam's image. Quietly, she showed it to street vendors, shopkeepers, anyone who might have seen him. The answers were vague. Most shook their heads. Some turned away. Late in the afternoon, just as frustration began to take hold, a man selling roasted peanuts pointed toward a nearby alley. "I've seen that kid sleeping back there near the corner store," he said. Following his lead, Rachel found Liam curled up beneath the cart. She approached slowly, not wanting to frighten him, then sat a short distance away, unpacking a bag of crackers and snacks. The scent caught his attention. With a gentle smile, she spoke softly. "It's okay. You don't have to be scared. I brought some food. Mind if we talk?" Hunger overruled hesitation, and soon Liam was nibbling at the crackers. Bit by bit, Rachel coaxed his story from his missing mother, the man with the ring, and what had happened at the restaurant. When he showed her the photo, recognition struck her instantly. The man beside Hannah was without question Ethan Cole. Rachel wasted no time. She knew this wasn't just a human interest story about a lost boy. It was bigger. It held secrets, unfinished chapters, buried truths. But to proceed, she needed Liam's trust. That night, she barely slept, crafting a careful plan to ensure he wouldn't retreat from her. By morning, armed with clean clothes and a new backpack, she returned to the alley. "How about a cup of hot cocoa?" she asked with a warm smile. Liam nodded. At a quiet cafe, over shy sips of cocoa, he recounted what little he knew, that his mother had vanished months ago, that she'd spoken of a man with the ring, and that the man in the restaurant might be the clue he'd waited for. Rachel listened intently. When he finished, she leaned forward and promised, "We're going to find your mom, Liam. But first, we need to speak with that man." The course was set, and Rachel understood this meeting needed to happen soon. Back at his company's headquarters, Ethan couldn't focus. The boardroom discussions blurred into meaningless chatter. Contracts piled unread on his desk. His thoughts kept drifting back to the ring, still in its box at home. Could Hannah have had a child, his child? Was the boy telling the truth? Doubts warred in his mind. Could this be some elaborate scam? A cruel attempt to leverage his past for money or power? But the boy's unwavering gaze, the conviction in his voice, none of it felt staged. Late that afternoon, as Ethan paced his apartment, the phone rang. It was the concierge. "Sir, a journalist is here. Name's Rachel Bennett. Says it's urgent." She left a message. "If you don't meet with me tonight, by tomorrow, the entire city will know that a child is claiming to be your son." Ethan exhaled sharply. There was no choice. "Send her up," he instructed. And for the first time in years, the ground beneath his feet felt unsteady. The elevator glided silently toward the penthouse floor of Ethan Cole's building. Inside the sleek cabin, Rachel Bennett kept her expression composed, though her pulse quickened with each passing second. Next to her stood Liam Parker, now dressed in clean clothes, his hair carefully combed, small fingers fidgeting nervously. It wasn't fear in his eyes, more like an anticipation too complex for words. The polished marble walls, the soft lighting, this tower of wealth felt a world apart from anything he'd known. Rachel gently rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You'll be fine. Just be yourself." As the doors slid open, they were greeted by a staff member who led them through the sprawling space to the main living area. There, by the vast windows that overlooked the Chicago skyline, stood Ethan, arms clasped behind his back. When he turned at the sound of their footsteps, his stern expression faltered. His gaze fixed on Liam, a mix of shock, recognition, and something deeper passing over his features, as if the past had suddenly stepped into the room. They sat in a modern, meticulously curated living room. The cool hues of the furniture stood in stark contrast to the warmth of the moment pressing in on them all. Rachel wasted no time. "Mr. Cole, this is Liam. He has something he wants to show you." Without a word, the boy reached into his backpack and drew out a worn, yellowed photograph, handing it over. Ethan's fingers trembled as he accepted it. His eyes scanned every detail. There was Hannah, younger, her smile bright, one arm around him, a piece of a life he'd long tried to bury. But what shook him even more was Liam's face, those same inquisitive brown eyes, that unmistakable tilt of the head. His throat tightened. Unable to speak, Ethan watched as Liam calmly pulled out a faded handkerchief, initials HP still embroidered, and placed it on the table beside the photo. Rachel's voice cut through the thick silence. "Mr. Cole, we need clarity. A DNA test." The Pause that followed was heavy with unspoken doubts and truths. Ethan's mind raced. Could this be a setup? A ploy for money or position? Part of him wanted to retreat, to question everything. But another part, perhaps the one that had caused him to faint in that restaurant, already knew. He drew in a steadying breath and found his voice. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do the test." Liam let out a small, relieved breath. He didn't grasp the full weight of what had just been set in motion, but he sensed this wasn't important. Step. Rachel's gaze remained steady. "I can arrange everything first thing tomorrow morning, quietly. No one else needs to know." Ethan gave a brief nod. The barriers he had spent years constructing were beginning to crumble, even if he wasn't ready to admit it aloud. The next morning dawned cold across Chicago. In a discreet genetic testing clinic downtown, staff prepared for one of their more unusual appointments. Ethan arrived alone, dressed in a dark overcoat, tension lining his face. Rachel and Liam were already in the waiting area. They exchanged few words. The attending physician, a calm woman with practiced efficiency, explained the process. Liam sat quietly, watching every movement. The test was swift and gentle. Throughout, Ethan remained standing off to one side, oddly detached, as though observing the scene from outside himself. When the doctor informed them results would be ready in 3 days, Ethan simply nodded. Rachel and Liam left first. Ethan lingered in the reception area for several more moments, trying in vain to organize the flood of thoughts racing through. His mind dot back in his penthouse. Ethan spread the contents of Hannah's old wooden box across his dining table. Photos, notes, that long unread letter. He studied each piece, searching for meaning in the small details. The resemblance between Liam and Hannah leapt out at him. The gaze, the curve of the smile, the subtle tilt of the head. But still, a battle raged within. What if this was all a coincidence? What if someone had unearthed fragments of the past to weave an elaborate deception? The fear of being manipulated warred with the powerful emotion the boy's presence had ignited. Yet deep down, he couldn't deny what had shifted inside him. Control, once the bedrock of his existence, now felt elusive. This unexpected collision with his past had cracked the walls he'd so carefully built, and there was no turning back. Meanwhile, Liam spent the afternoon in Rachel's cozy loft in Logan Square. The apartment, once a quiet sanctuary for the journalist, now buzzed with the boy's curiosity. He explored the bookshelves, flipped through notepads filled with notes, asked endless questions. But later, as Rachel prepared dinner, Liam approached quietly, an earnest look in his eyes. "If he's not my dad, will you still help me find my mom?" The raw honesty of the question stopped her mid-motion. She knelt beside him. "Of course, Liam. No matter what the test says, I'm with you." A tentative smile tugged at his lips, a small flicker of hope where there had been so little before. More than anything, he just didn't want to face this search alone anymore. Autumn had settled firmly over Chicago. The crisp chill in the air seemed to seep into every corner of the city, wrapping the streets and buildings in a cold embrace. 3 days had passed since the visit to the clinic, and both Ethan Cole and Rachel Bed found themselves waiting for the results with mounting anticipation. In Rachel's small apartment in Logan Square, she did everything she could to keep young Liam occupied. They took trips to the park, picked up children's books from a nearby secondhand shop, strolled along the tree-lined streets. But despite the cheerful diversions, Liam's gaze often drifted toward the horizon, as though hoping for news that might finally change everything. Rachel remained vigilant. She had seen stories like this unravel under fear or bad intentions. But something about Ethan Cole told her this wasn't one of those cases. What weighed on her more was the growing uncertainty around Hannah Parker's disappearance. Each day that passed without a sign from the boy's mother deepened her urgency. The more Liam clung to hope, the more Rachel felt that someone had to step forward and drive this search. Across the city, Ethan Cole paced the corridors of his sleek downtown office, unable to shake the restless energy that consumed him. For days, he had tried to bury himself in work, but nothing seemed to matter anymore. The faces in meetings blurred together. Words floated past without meaning, while one image kept dominating his mind, Liam's eyes, so hauntingly familiar, so much like Hannah's. When the envelope with the test results finally landed on his desk, it felt as though the entire world paused around him. He closed the door, silenced the phone, and sat down. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper and read the words carefully. Genetic compatibility, 99. 2%. Paternity confirmed. The sheet slipped from his fingers and landed on the cool surface of his desk. He bowed his head into his hands, struggling for breath. His tightly controlled life had just been turned upside down. There was no longer room for doubt Liam was his son. But Hannah, where was she? Without hesitation, Ethan grabbed the phone and called Rachel. His voice, usually composed and commanding, trembled. "Ms. Bennett, I need to see you both. Now." He offered no details, but Rachel understood immediately. Less than an hour later, Ethan stood at her apartment door. When it opened, he found Liam seated on the couch, notebook resting on his lap, small eyes lifted to meet his. Ethan knelt before him, unsure how to begin. "Liam, the test. It's true. You are my son." The words caught in his throat. Liam sat quietly, processing this revelation. Then, in a small voice, he asked, "So, what happens now?" Ethan felt a lump in his throat. "Now, I'd like to get to know you, to protect you, if that's okay with you." He didn't force titles, didn't push for a connection. He simply allowed the words to settle naturally between them. In the days that followed, a new rhythm began to take shape. Liam started visiting Ethan's penthouse a few afternoons each week. Rachel remained close, making sure the boy felt safe. Ethan, inexperienced with children, put genuine effort into making his home welcoming. He set up a room just for Liam, bought new clothes, and even attempted breakfast one morning, though. The pancakes were slightly burnt, and the cocoa overly sweet. Liam, curious but cautious, began to open up. He didn't say much, but he drew. His notebooks began to fill with sketches of this new life, towering windows, a silver ring, a slightly awkward Ethan in the kitchen. It was his way of making sense of this unfamiliar world taking shape around him. One quiet Saturday afternoon, as they sifted through old boxes in Ethan's office, Liam discovered a small folded piece of paper tucked between some books. Inside was a handwritten note from Hannah, a simple poem. "If the wind carries my name, search in the eyes of who remains." Liam read it carefully, then looked up. "She wrote this for you?" Ethan nodded. "She used to leave notes everywhere on the mirror, in my jacket pocket, between pages of books. It was her way of letting me know she was thinking of me." Liam tucked the note carefully into his own notebook, treasuring the small connection to his mother, and now to Ethan as well. Rachel, watching this fragile bond take root, recognized how rare this moment was. Some ties could endure through time and distance, and what was unfolding here felt like one of them. Yet questions still hung in the air. Hannah had vanished without a trace. There was fear woven into her final words. A tension echoed in Liam's memories. During a quiet walk through the neighborhood, Liam shared more with Ethan that his mom had lived for months in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, in a part of Westridge where no one asked too many questions. She'd always told him they had to stay hidden, that someone might be looking for them. She said a man had come back. "Someone dangerous," Liam explained. The revelation sent a cold shiver through Ethan. If someone had indeed been hunting, Hannah, then her disappearance might run deeper than they'd imagined. More than ever, Ethan knew he had to uncover the truth. And to do that, he would have to confront parts of his past he had long tried to leave buried. Early that week, determined not to delay any longer, Ethan proposed that he and Rachel go together to the neighborhood Liam had mentioned. The area, a modest stretch of West Ridge far from the polished heart of downtown Chicago, was a patchwork of aging apartment buildings and small, worn houses. It wasn't the kind of place where men of Ethan's stature typically ventured, but none of that mattered to him anymore. He needed answers, clues, any trace that could help piece together Hannah's steps. On the morning, they agreed to go. Ethan picked up Rachel and Liam. The boy settled into the back seat, notebook in his lap, his small frame tense with anticipation. During the drive, Liam guided them with surprising certainty, pointing out familiar turns. When they reached a narrow street with cracked sidewalks and faded paint on sagging fences, he quietly said, "That's where we lived." Ethan parked the car, his chest tight with unease. The three of them approached the weathered house. Ethan knocked firmly. An elderly woman peeked through a window, suspicion clouding her features. "Looking for someone?" she asked. Ethan introduced himself politely, explaining they were seeking information about Hannah Parker, who had lived there months ago. The woman pointed them toward her neighbor, a man named Frank, who had rented a small room to Hannah. Frank, a middle-aged man with a sincere manner, welcomed them in, though surprised. The modest living room was filled with mismatched furniture and soft morning light. His eyes landed on Liam with a flicker of recognition. "Well, little Liam, never. Thought I'd see you again," he murmured. Glancing at Ethan and Rachel, his tone grew somber. She was a good woman, took such care of him. He set down his coffee and leaned forward. She stayed here nearly a year. Always paid on time, respectful. But in those last few weeks, she was different. I could see the fear in her eyes. She kept saying someone had come back. A dangerous man. Never gave a name. He paused, sipping from his mug. One day, she left for work. Asked me to watch Liam, said she'd be back that evening. But she never came back. Rachel, her voice calm, asked, "Did you try to look for her?" Frank nodded. I waited ... Then, on the second day, this woman showed up. Said she was a friend of Hannah's. Claimed she was out of town and had asked her to get Liam. He turned to the boy. "You remember that, son?" Liam hugged his notebook to his chest and gave a small nod. Frank sighed. "I didn't know the woman, but she spoke like she knew them." I thought it was better than keeping the boy here. Not knowing what happened, Ethan's jaw tightened. "Do you remember what this woman looked like?" Frank frowned. Short, dark hair. Maybe mid-30s. She didn't give a name. I should have asked more questions. Guilt tinged his voice. As though struck by a sudden thought, Frank stood and fetched a cardboard box. "She left this behind." I kept it, just in case. Inside were a pale blue notebook, some old photos, a few letters, and a pair of earrings. Ethan carefully sifted through the contents. One letter caught his eye, Hannah's handwriting. He read silently. "If you're reading this, I couldn't. Come back. It wasn't because I didn't love you. The fear won. Please take care of our son." The words struck deep. This wasn't abandonment. It had been an escape. Ethan placed a steady hand on Liam's shoulder. The boy, clutching the notebook, looked up with trust. Between them, a silent resolve formed. The search wasn't over. It was just beginning. On the drive back to Rachel's, the car was quiet for a while. In the back seat, Liam seemed lost. In thought. Then, voice trembling, he spoke. "That lady, she wasn't my mom's friend." Ethan and Rachel turned to listen. "She took me away. Said Mom had gone on a trip and was leaving me with other people, but then she left me. Alone. In a park. His words broke slightly. Rachel asked softly, "Do you remember where?" Liam nodded. "Near Union Station. I stayed there, then just started walking. I didn't know where to go. The puzzle pieces were falling into place. Someone had deliberately forced Hannah away. The woman who claimed to be a friend had only covered up her disappearance." Ethan's hands clenched the steering wheel. He was determined. He would find out who was behind this. Back at Rachel's apartment, they gathered in the living room to plan their next move. Ethan's tone was resolute. "I want the police involved, quietly. And I need you, Rachel, to dig deeper. Whoever did this needs to be found." Rachel agreed. She already knew this was more than a missing persons case. For Liam, the conversation that morning brought bittersweet relief. Knowing his mother hadn't abandoned him restored a glimmer of hope. As he drew the simple house they'd lived in, he whispered, "She wanted to come back, ... I know." Ethan heard him and answered firmly, "And we will bring her back, Liam, I promise." The boy looked up, and in that moment, father and son shared a certainty. They would face whatever came. Together. In the days that followed, Rachel set her contacts into motion. She combed through records, spoke to old neighbors, pieced together whatever fragments of Hannah's story she could find. Ethan, meanwhile, quietly enlisted the help of a trusted friend inside the Chicago PD to investigate discreetly. He avoided involving his company or drawing media attention. Meanwhile, Liam began spending more time at Ethan's apartment. Though still carrying the marks of life on the streets, the boy slowly opened up. The room prepared just for him began, filling with drawings, books, and little treasures of his own. Mornings now had their own rhythm-warm bagels, cocoa, and quiet conversations. For Ethan, each gesture was a step toward building the bond with the son he never knew he had. But above all, the search for Hannah remained urgent. Each clue, each thread of her story whispered the same truth. She hadn't disappeared by choice, and perhaps she wasn't as far away as they feared. The days that followed were filled with purpose. Rachel dove headfirst into her investigation, tapping old sources from her reporting days, combing through records, speaking with residents in the neighborhood, and chasing any lead that could connect Hannah's disappearance to something larger. Meanwhile, Ethan focused all his energy on Liam. He brought the boy to his apartment more often now, wanting him to feel safe and slowly build trust in a life so different from the one he'd known on the streets. The growing closeness between them was unmistakable. Liam, once shy and quiet, had started asking questions, opening up, curious about the past. Their simple routines, shared breakfasts, walks to the park, bedtime conversations were quietly building a bond. For Ethan, each small gesture from his son was a step toward reclaiming the years they'd lost. And the boy's presence was giving Ethan's life a depth no amount of business success ever had. One crisp Wednesday afternoon, while reorganizing an old bookcase in Ethan's office, Liam discovered a yellowed envelope tucked behind a row of dusty volumes. Curious, he called out to his father. Inside was a note from Hannah, written years earlier. "Don't forget to look beyond what's in front of you. Sometimes the past returns in unexpected ways." The words were simple, but their meaning lingered in Ethan's mind. "Your mom always had a way of saying so much with so little," he said, a soft sadness in his voice. Liam carefully tucked the note into his notebook, treasuring it like every other piece of his mother he'd rediscovered. Yet questions weighed on the boy. One evening, curled up on the couch beside Ethan, Liam asked plainly, "If we find her, do you think she want to come back?" The honesty in that question pierced Ethan. Without hesitation, he answered, "I can't know for sure, Liam, but what I do know is that she loved us. And I'll do everything I can to make sure we're together, however she wants that to look." As father and son quietly grew closer, Rachel was making progress of her own. Piecing together reports from city records and stories from Hannah's old friends, she uncovered troubling details. Months before Hannah disappeared, she'd been confronted by someone from Ethan's past, a former business associate forced out years ago after unethical dealings. The name sent a chill through Ethan when Rachel shared it: Gerard Baxter. Hearing that, Ethan felt old tension stir. That man threatened me once. He knew about Hannah. If he's back, it explains a lot. The urgency was clear. They needed to move carefully. Rachel suggested looping in a trusted police contact, a detective known for discretion. Ethan agreed immediately. He didn't want the press involved, and above all, he needed to shield Liam from further turmoil. The following afternoon, they visited the precinct together. The detective, a seasoned, no-nonsense officer, listened carefully. The moment Baxter's name was mentioned, his expression darkened. He's been seen around the city again recently. No formal charges, but his name's come up in street chatter. He promised to dig deeper and keep them informed. Back at Ethan's apartment, even though Liam couldn't grasp all the details, he sensed something was happening. During dinner, he asked quietly, "That man ... did he hurt my mom?" Ethan answered gently, "I think he scared her. That's why she disappeared. But now we're looking for her, and we're going to protect her." The boy listened intently. Later, in his drawings, which had once been only of him and his mom, new images emerged, a father holding his hand. To Ethan, it was clear they were building something real. Then, a few evenings later, a call shattered the quiet of the apartment. It was the detective. He had a lead. A woman matching Hannah's description had been spotted a few weeks earlier, near an abandoned rail yard on Chicago's south side. The area, neglected and mostly empty, was known as a place for those looking to disappear. Ethan didn't hesitate. He called Rachel. "Get Liam ready. We're going down there. If there's even a chance, we can't waste it." Not long after, well into the evening, the three of them set out, hope and nerves running high. Liam clutched his notebook tightly in the back seat. For him, tonight could change everything. And for Ethan, the search for Hannah was no longer just a duty. It had become something deeper. The time to find her was slipping away, and he couldn't afford to lose another piece of the life that might have been. The abandoned train depot on the south side of Chicago was the kind of place the city had long since forgotten. Rusted tracks crisscrossed the ground, weeds choking the old platforms, graffiti-covered walls standing like grim sentinels. The echo of emptiness hung in the air. Yet for those with nowhere else to go, runaways, the homeless, the lost, it still served as a shelter. When Ethan, Rachel, and Liam arrived, they moved carefully across the uneven lot, their breath misting in the cool air. Liam clutched his notebook to his chest, eyes wide and alert. Every shadowed corner seemed to whisper with memories. Rachel scanned the dim spaces, exchanging glances with a few wary figures tucked into the gloom. She approached a man hunched on a splintered bench, showing him a photo of Hannah. He shook his head slowly, then nodded toward a side corridor. Sometimes a woman like that comes through. Hadn't seen her in a little while. Finally, a lead. They moved in that direction, hope flickering. The hallway led them to a small room with shattered windows and old furniture stacked along the walls. On the floor lay a worn mattress and scattered blankets, clear signs someone had been staying there. In the corner, something caught Liam's eye. He darted forward, kneeling to retrieve a battered notebook with loose pages curling at the edges. He opened it gently. A diary. The entries were dated not long ago, though some ink had run from dampness. Flipping through, Ethan recognized Hannah's handwriting instantly. The words were raw, personal, not for anyone else's eyes, but a record of fear and isolation. Another day, still no news, still afraid. Can't take the risk. Liam, is he safe? I have to stay strong. I can't fail. The sentences hit Ethan hard. It was a window into her desperate struggle to hold on. She was alive. And still in danger. Each page only deepened Ethan's determination. He had to reach her before it was too late. As they absorbed the meaning of the diary, footsteps echoed faintly down the corridor. Rachel stood quickly, facing the doorway. A rough-looking man appeared, clothes worn thin, eyes suspicious. "You folks shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and guarded. Ethan stepped forward calmly. "We're looking for someone." "A woman. She was here." He held out Hannah's photo. The man's gaze shifted. Recognition. "Yeah, saw her around. Kept to herself, didn't talk. Stayed in this room. But she hasn't been back for a few weeks now." Ethan's heart pounded. It was confirmation. Hannah had been here. The man went on. "Some guy came asking about her. Bald, big guy, black car. After that, she disappeared again." The pieces were falling into place. Ethan thanked him quietly, then motioned for them to leave. It was time to plan the next move. Back in the car, Liam flipped through the diary, tears brimming in his eyes. "She was here, and someone scared her away again," he whispered. Ethan gripped the wheel tightly. "But now we know. We have a trail, and we won't stop." Rachel, turning the information over in her mind, knew they were edging closer to the heart of the truth. Who exactly was hunting Hannah? Gerard Baxter seemed key to this tangled mess. In the days that followed, Rachel worked harder than ever. Her sources revealed that Baxter, ousted from Ethan's company years earlier, was now tied to shady business dealings and had been spotted in Chicago recently. Worse, he had connections with known criminals in the city's underworld. The threat to Hannah was real. When Ethan heard, he doubled down on protecting Liam, unwilling to take any chances. As Rachel's investigation pushed forward, Ethan tightened his own routines with Liam. He kept the boy close, made sure their days followed a steady, reassuring rhythm. Little by little, Liam's trust in him grew stronger. Every meal, every bedtime story, every quiet talk deepened their bond. Ethan couldn't afford to fail, not now. Each night, watching Liam fall asleep with Hannah's diary cradled in his arms, Ethan's resolve hardened. He would bring her home, no matter the risk. For her, for their son. Each new thread of information Rachel uncovered confirmed what she'd suspected. Baxter wasn't acting alone. Others were involved, and the danger was escalating. But so too was her certainty that Hannah was still nearby. And that soon, the reunion Liam dreamed of would move from hope to reality. The time for answers was fast approaching. In the days that followed the discovery of Hannah's diary at the abandoned train station, Rachel threw herself deeper into her investigation. She reached out to old sources in the corporate world, dug through archives from the time Gerard Baxter had been forced out of Cole Enterprises. Slowly, the puzzle pieces began to align. Years ago, Baxter had been Ethan's father's right-hand man, until he was ousted after illegal dealings came to light, not long after the elder Cole's death, and well after Hannah had vanished. Ethan had never known the full story until now. Worse, it became clear Baxter had been circulating in Chicago again in recent months, and he was hunting for Hannah. His motive was personal revenge. He blamed Ethan for his fall from grace and knew targeting Hannah would be the most painful way to get to him. When Rachel laid out the details, Ethan was torn between guilt and fury. It all made sense now how, unknowingly, his own family's actions had fueled the fear that kept Hannah in hiding. An old memory slammed into Ethan, a conversation with his father, back when Hannah had likely been pregnant. The elder Cole, always calculating, had warned that certain family decisions would have to be made to protect their name. Back then, young and in love, Ethan hadn't grasped the full meaning. Now, the truth burned. his father had orchestrated threats behind the scenes. Baxter had been the enforcer. Hannah had fled to protect her unborn child. Rage boiled inside Ethan, but that rage brought a fierce clarity. Hannah couldn't live in fear any longer. It was time to bring her home, to shatter the cycle of intimidation and silence that had stolen years from them both. The breakthrough came days later. One of Rachel's sources brought word of Hannah's whereabouts at a dilapidated factory on the outskirts of the city, mostly abandoned and dangerous. Worse, Baxter had already caught wind of her location and was preparing to strike. Without hesitation, Rachel alerted Ethan and her contact in the police department. Action had to be immediate. Ethan didn't think twice. He called Rachel and told her to secure Liam. "We finished this tonight," he said, voice resolute. Rachel moved swiftly. The detective assembled a small, trusted team. There was no time for elaborate plans. Every minute counted. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He paced through his apartment, going over every detail. The thought of failing Hannah, of being too late, haunted him. But the determination in his chest was stronger. He would bring her back, for her. For their son. At dawn, they rolled out. Ethan, Rachel, and the police officers headed together toward the factory. Liam remained safely in the care of Rachel's friend. In the car, the tension was thick. Everyone understood what was at stake. When they reached the building, the sight was grim, crumbling walls, shattered windows, long dark hallways. The detective gave quiet instructions to proceed with caution. Rachel showed Hannah's photo around the nearby streets. A resident confirmed seeing her entering the rear entrance. Days before, it was the sign they needed. Ethan moved forward, adrenaline surging. The cold concrete echoed underfoot. Every door could hold the answer or fresh danger. On one of the upper floors, they found signs of recent activity: a blanket, a makeshift burner, a bag with a few supplies. And on an old wooden crate, more pages from Hannah's diary. She had been here, maybe still was. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from below, a door slamming, hurried footsteps. The detective and two officers moved swiftly downstairs. Rachel and Ethan held their position, hearts pounding. Then came the voice Ethan would never forget: Baxter. The man was prowling the building, not alone. The officers tightened the net. Rachel gripped Ethan's arm. "We're close, so close." Then, footsteps lighter, hesitant from a side corridor. Rachel and Ethan turned sharply. Hannah emerged, pale, gaunt, her eyes wide with fear. The sight of Ethan stopped her cold. Years of pain and longing surged between them, overwhelming. Ethan stepped toward her, words caught in his throat. But the moment shattered as shouts and the sound of cuffs rang from below. Baxter had been caught. The immediate threat was neutralized. The detective returned upstairs with a nod. It was over for now. Ethan approached Hannah, who was barely standing. Rachel offered her an arm. "You're safe now," she said softly. But they all knew this was only the beginning. The long road back was just starting. The hospital where Hannah was taken wasn't far from the abandoned building. It was a modest facility, but the staff was attentive and efficient. Rachel rode ahead with her, while Ethan followed in another car with the detective. Hannah looked frail, worn down by years of hiding, constant fear, and the toll of poor nutrition. Yet, through the exhaustion, there was relief in her gaze when she saw Ethan walking beside her stretcher. Liam, still safe at Rachel's friend's home, hadn't yet been told his mother had been found. Ethan had asked them to wait until they were sure Hannah was stable. Initial tests confirmed severe physical and emotional exhaustion, but nothing life-threatening. After a night of rest, Hannah was able to sit up and speak. Ethan never left the hospital. He sat at her bedside patiently, offering quiet support. Without pressure, waiting for her to speak when she was ready. That moment came the morning of the second day. The room was hushed, sunlight filtering softly through the blinds. Rachel arrived with a cup of coffee. Hannah gave a faint nod of thanks and turned to Ethan. Her voice was fragile, but the truth in it cut through the air. "I should have told you everything ... but I couldn't." The words broke through in choked sobs. Ethan reached for her hand and held it gently. She continued, "Your father, he called me one day. I was already pregnant. He said, if I didn't disappear ... if I didn't leave you ... he'd ruin my life. He said he'd take my baby. I had no chance." The anguish in every word was palpable. Rachel, standing quietly by the window, listened without interrupting. Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of her revelation sinking in. "I didn't know. I never knew any of this." Hannah drew a shaky breath and went on. "It was Baxter. He was the one who threatened me, who followed me. I ran. I left the city. I didn't want to, but I couldn't risk it. For Liam." Tears slid down her cheek. "When I heard your father had died, I thought about coming back. But Baxter was still around, and I didn't have the courage. I didn't know if you hated me. I didn't know if it would be safe for Liam." Ethan clasped her hand tighter. "You should never have had to face that alone. But it's over now. You're here. And nothing is going to keep you from our son again." Hannah's voice trembled as she whispered, "Forgive me for not being able to come back." Ethan shook his head slowly. "There's nothing to forgive. If anyone has to make things, RIGHT, it's me. For not seeing it, for not searching harder." The silence between them said what words could not. It was Rachel who finally broke the heavy quiet. She sat down beside the bed, her tone warm and steady. "You were stronger than anyone could have asked, Hannah. No one would have done it differently, not with a child to protect. Now you've got a chance to start over. We all do." Hannah's glance toward Rachel was full of gratitude. Without her, they might never have found her. That afternoon, the detective returned with news. Gerard Baxter had confessed. He had acted alone, driven by vengeance against Ethan for his own downfall. The rest of the Cole family had known nothing of his actions. The threat was finally over. The road to healing could now begin. On the third day, after Hannah was cleared for discharge, Ethan brought Liam to the hospital. The boy ran down the hallway, bursting with excitement. When the door opened and he saw his mother sitting up, pale but smiling, he flew into her arms. Their tearful embrace filled the room with emotion. Ethan stood quietly nearby, honoring the moment. When Hannah finally looked up at him, Liam still clinging to her, she whispered, "Now ... I can finally breathe." Ethan stepped closer, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "And you'll never have to run again." The embrace that followed was a vow one none of them would ever break. The months that followed were far from simple. The years of fear and separation couldn't be erased overnight. But slowly, life began to take on new shape. Hannah and Liam moved into a modest apartment in Lincoln Park, a peaceful neighborhood, with nearby schools and a small park that quickly became Liam's favorite place. Ethan made sure to be part of every step of their new life. He arranged Liam's school enrollment, attended Hannah's medical appointments, and ensured she had everything she needed to rebuild. He never pushed. He didn't pressure her about the past or their relationship. He simply showed up every day with steady actions. From that consistency, a new trust emerged between them. For Liam, seeing his parents together in this new and simple way was proof enough that the shadows of the past were finally starting to fade. After taking time to rest and work with a therapist, Hannah decided she wanted to return to work. She had no intention of depending on anyone or living in someone else's shadow again. With help from Ethan and Rachel, she found a job as a librarian at a cultural center in the city. The work brought her joy and gave her back a sense of identity. Bit by bit, she began writing again, not as an escape, but as a way to process, to turn pain into something meaningful. Liam, thriving in his new school, made friends quickly. His essays told stories of trains, of family, of a dad who made pancakes, and a mom who read bedtime stories. The drawing of the tree with a bench and 3 figures, now colored with a bright blue sky, earned a special place on his bedroom wall. Meanwhile, Rachel had completed a thorough investigative piece on the case, which was published in one of the nation's leading news outlets. The article, which spotlighted women forced to live in hiding out of fear and threats, gained wide attention. It won awards, opened doors to new opportunities, and solidified Rachel's standing as one of the top investigative journalists in the country. When Ethan met her one crisp autumn afternoon at a cafe downtown to thank her, he spoke earnestly. "No words will ever be enough, but you changed our lives." Rachel, ever steady, smiled. "I just did what needed to be done. What you've all built, that's your doing." Between them remained a mutual respect and a friendship forged through hardship, one that would only grow stronger over time. Ethan and Hannah's relationship grew at its own pace. There was no room for illusions. There was, however, a real and steady desire to be together differently now, more maturely, more honestly. They began sharing weekends, family dinners, afternoons at the park. Ethan no longer kept anything hidden. He spoke openly with Hannah, even about the failings of the past. And Hannah, in turn, allowed herself to trust again. She could see that the man beside her was no longer the same. Liam sensed it too in their glances, their gestures, their easy conversations. One afternoon in the park, watching his parents sit side by side, Liam drew a new picture. A house with open windows and a blossoming tree in the yard. When he showed it to Hannah, she smiled, her eyes misty. Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They didn't need grand promises. What they were building spoke for itself. Life found its rhythm. Ethan, still fully in charge of his company, had learned to balance his priorities. He still handled key decisions, but now carved out more time for Liam and Hannah. He insisted on picking Liam up from school, cooking dinner a few nights a week, helping with homework, and joining them on outings. With each passing day, he discovered the joy of being a present father. Hannah, now deeply connected to her neighborhood, became known in the local cultural community for her grace and strength. At the library, she was admired for her warmth and wisdom. To the neighbors, she was no longer the woman who had once been, forced to hide, but someone who had risen with quiet dignity. When Liam's birthday arrived, they chose to celebrate simply but meaningfully, a picnic at the park, with friends, classmates, Rachel, and a few of the kind neighbors who had once helped Hannah. Beneath Liam's favorite tree, surrounded by laughter and slices of cake, the boy wrote in his notebook, "Now we are a family, not like before, like now." And that was the beginning they all deserved. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.